right, 8th graders, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about chassis construction. Most of you by now have started on this step and are well under your way. I did throw out some suggestions during class as to how to work on it, but I didn't really have anything formal on video, so I thought I'd put this together real quick right before parent-teacher conferences start. I kept having all kinds of interruptions with the intercom, but I got some free pizza. I think it's quiet. I'm going to try and put together a short little video for our lesson for today. So I have an example of a chassis right here. This is a standard one with the rollerblade style wheels. It does have the long axle underneath. And I made the suggestion that you put the bearings on the inside of your base plate. That way they're going to be out of the way of any additional mechanism that you set up. If you put them on the inside, that gives you more axle length to work with. Plus that enables you, if you're going to use a gear, or if you're going to use a sprocket, or if you're going to use a bevel gear, that gives you more room between the wheel and the base plate. See, look at all this extra room you have when you have that set up. Now, let me flip this around. Here, a student has taken a gear, and just some issues here. I think your mechanism should be driven from the inside, and so I don't want this gear on the outside of the wheel. And the other thing I don't like is this gear is pretty large. I think once we put a chain on this, it's going to get in the way of the wheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a different size, and I've been saying gear, I should say sprocket. I'm going to switch out the larger sprocket for the smaller sprocket, and I'm going to put it on the inside. So you want to make sure that you're using a diameter gear or sprocket that isn't going to interfere with the diameter of your wheel. So let me go ahead and loosen this collar here so that we can make some changes. And these slide on there pretty tight. So if we can move our gear here to the inside, and it should ride along the base plate just fine, especially if you've taken your machine screws and put it so that the screw head is facing out. That way we're not worried about the bolt running into your mechanism. So make sure the bearings are on the inside and the screw heads face out. Then we can slide our wheel back on, and that'll spin just fine now. Now we can place our gear inside of there. So let me put this collar back on for these students. I think this is one out of third period. So they're probably wondering what happened to their project if I forget to put it back. So now we have the gear on the inside. Let me flip this back over now. A good example of how to set up a secondary mechanism that is going to be driven as the pull toy is drug across the floor. They've set up part of their girder. Now you can use the whole girder that you've used for your mechanism builds. And I like that because it has two sides. If we're starting to set up some drive shafts on just this, it's going to be kind of wobbly. So if you want to stick with your regular girder, you used it for the mechanisms, you used it for the windmill challenge, it'd also be a good thing to use for this. That way when we start placing some sprockets here, we got a good plate to build off of. So we'd be able to run our chain up through here. So I got a piece of chain here. And we can have that running up to here, and then we can place our bearings on this bracket for this mechanism. So you can kind of see as I roll that, the chain's going to turn, and it's going to drive that gear. So we'll get that gear placed up there. Now I wanted to show you another option. Base plates seem to be the easiest to work with because every group's been assigned a base plate. But another thing you can do is build a chassis out of just some metal hardware. So here's several pieces that I've put together. And the thing I like about this is I'm going to be driving my secondary mechanism from the middle of my chassis instead of having it off to the side. So that way when I start building up my secondary structure, if I wanted to do a cam and follow or a crank and slider, those seem to be popular mechanisms that are actuated by the wheels, then it's going to look more proportional. So I have this in the center. I got some metal brackets that I got out of the blue tubs to build up this chassis. And I have the example of the larger diameter wheels that can be used once we run out of those rollerblade style wheels. So this is just an example that I'm going to work on over the next few class periods. So I'm going to try and share my progress with you every day so that you have a good idea of what this is going to look like when it comes together. Now, what's going to be important at the end of every period, because when we were doing the mechanisms, we were predominantly working off those carts, we were working out of those trays, and that's okay to continue using the trays, but you're to the point where you're going to start collecting more small pieces, and as we get close to the end of the period, those need to go back in inventory, and they need to go back in the right place, or there's just going to be a lot of resorting that we're all going to have to do together towards the end of the class, and we don't want to use the time for that. So please make sure that you're taking the time at the end of the period to get the parts back in their organized area. That's going to be essentially important that we keep these organized for all 6 periods. I'm working with 140 students. We got over 41 different groups, so we got a lot of stuff out. So make sure when you're putting your small pieces back up that they go in the right place. Well, I hope you're having good luck with your chassis. I hope you're looking at some of these examples, such as placing the bearings on the inside of your base plate, making sure the screw heads are facing out so that that doesn't interfere. That way you can get your sprockets or your gears on the inside out of the way, and then you can just kind of streamline the whole design of your pull toy. I hope you have a good time with this activity, and until next time, good luck.